The auctioneer's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Sold! $1 to the man in the black hat." Colter Grange didn't flinch as every eye in the saloon turned toward him. The girl stood on the makeshift stage, barefoot, hollow-eyed, silent. Her dress was little more than rags. Her father slumped drunk against the bar, pocketing the coin without a backward glance. "She's deaf as a post," the auctioneer announced, wiping whiskey from his mustache. "Ain't spoke a word in 10 years, won't work, won't obey. Good luck with that one, mister." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone threw a peanut shell at the stage. Colter walked forward, boots heavy on the warped floorboards. He removed his coat and draped it over her thin shoulders. She looked up, not with fear, but with something that made his chest tighten. Recognition. Like she'd been waiting for him her entire life. He led her out into the Montana snow without a word. Behind them, her father ordered another drink and forgot she'd ever existed. If you're already hooked, smash that like button and subscribe, because this story is about to take you on a journey you won't forget. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. The wagon creaked through 15 miles of frozen wilderness. Colter didn't speak. The girl didn't either. She sat beside him, wrapped in his coat, watching the pine trees pass like silent sentinels. He glanced at her once. Her eyes were scanning everything. The tracks in the snow, the flight patterns of ravens, the way the horse's ears swiveled at sounds he couldn't hear. Deaf, he thought. Right. When they finally reached the ranch, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the snow gold and crimson. The cabin sat in a clearing, smoke curling from the chimney. It was small, isolated, perfect for a man who wanted to be forgotten. He helped her down from the wagon. She stood there, taking it all in. The barn, the fence line, the woods beyond. Then she looked at him and nodded once. Approval, acceptance. He couldn't tell. "Come on," he said, forgetting again that she supposedly couldn't hear. "Let's get you inside before you freeze." But she was already walking toward the door. The cabin was sparse. A stone fireplace, a wooden table, 2 chairs, a single bedroom, and a small loft above. Colter lit the lamps and stoked the fire. The girl stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, absorbing every detail. "You can take the bedroom," he said, pointing. "I'll sleep up there." Her eyes followed his gesture. She walked to the bedroom door, looked inside, then shook her head. She pointed at the loft, then at herself. "You want the loft?" She nodded. "It's colder up there." She didn't move. He sighed. "Suit yourself." He showed her the ladder. She climbed it with surprising grace, disappearing into the shadows above. A moment later, she reappeared at the edge, looking down at him. She pressed her hand to her chest, then pointed at him. "Thank you." His throat tightened. He nodded. She vanished again. Colter stood there for a long moment, staring at the fire. He'd bought a human being for $1, a child. What the hell was he supposed to do now? He poured himself a whiskey and sat by the fire until it burned down to embers. He woke to the smell of coffee. Colter bolted upright. He hadn't made coffee. He stumbled out of the loft and found her in the kitchen, standing on a chair, pouring grounds into the pot. The fire was already going. Bread was sliced on the table. Butter sat beside it. She turned when she heard him, climbed down, and gestured to the table. "You did all this?" She nodded. "How'd you know where everything was?" She tapped her temple, then her eyes. "I looked." He sat down slowly. She poured him coffee. Strong, black, perfect. Then she sat across from him, hands folded, waiting. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated. Then she reached for the pencil he kept by his ledger. She wrote in careful, shaky letters. "Iris, Iris," he repeated. "That's a good name." She smiled. It was small, fragile, but real. "I'm Colter." She nodded. She already knew. 3 days passed. Iris worked without being asked. She fed the chickens, gathered eggs, mended a torn shirt he'd left on the chair. She moved through the cabin like a ghost. Silent, efficient, always watching. Colter found himself talking to her, even though he knew she supposedly couldn't hear. Old habits. He'd lived alone too long. "Storm's coming," he said one morning, checking the sky. "Gonna need to bring in extra wood." She was already at the woodpile. He blinked. "How'd you—" She pointed at the clouds, then at the animals. The chickens were huddled, the horses restless. "You can read weather?" She shrugged. "Can't you?" That afternoon, while mending fence near the barn, Colter heard it, a low, guttural growl that made his blood run cold. He grabbed his rifle and ran. Inside the barn, a massive gray wolf stood cornered near the back stall, bleeding from a trap wound on its hind leg. Its teeth were bared, eyes wild with pain and rage. And there, 10 feet away, was Iris, kneeling in the hay, hands out, humming. "Get back!" Colter shouted, raising the rifle. She didn't move, didn't even glance at him. The wolf's ears flicked toward her. Its growl softened to a whine. She kept humming, low, rhythmic, almost like a lullaby. The wolf took a limping step forward, then another. It lowered its head and pressed its muzzle into her outstretched palm. Colter's hands shook on the rifle. "What in God's name—" Iris looked back at him, calm as Sunday morning. She pointed at the wolf's leg, then at the medical kit on the shelf. He lowered the rifle slowly, walked forward. The wolf's eyes tracked him, but it didn't move from Iris's side. Together, they cleaned the wound. Iris held the wolf steady, whispering things Colter couldn't hear. The animal never snapped, never flinched. It watched her with something that looked almost like devotion. When they finished, Colter opened the barn door. The wolf limped out into the twilight, paused at the tree line, and looked back at Iris one last time. Then it vanished into the dark. Colter turned to her. "Who the hell are you?" She smiled, and for the first time, he saw it clearly. She wasn't broken. She wasn't cursed. She was extraordinary. Word spread like wildfire. By the following Sunday, half the town knew that Colter Grange's deaf girl had tamed a wild wolf with her bare hands. The story grew with each telling. Some said she'd sung to it. Others said she'd cast a spell. The preacher called it witchcraft from the pulpit. Colter ignored it all, but the visitors started coming anyway. First was Old Man Hewitt, hat in hand. "Heard your girl's got away with animals. My mare threw a shoe and won't let anyone near her. Been 3 days. She's gonna starve if we can't get to her." Colter looked at Iris. She was already putting on her coat. They rode out to Hewitt's ranch. The mare was wild-eyed, kicking at anyone who approached. Iris walked into the pen alone. The mare charged. Colter reached for his rope. But Iris stood perfectly still. The mare stopped 3 feet away, snorting, stamping. Iris hummed. The mare's ears swiveled forward. She took a step closer, then another. Within minutes, she was nuzzling Iris's shoulder while the girl examined her hoof and removed the stone lodged beneath the shoe. Hewitt stared. I'll be damned. Word spread faster after that. They came in droves. A rancher with a dog gone mean after a rattlesnake bite. A widow with a horse that wouldn't eat. A farmer whose oxen refused to pull the plow. One by one, Iris fixed them. A touch, a hum, a look. She never asked for payment, never spoke, just worked with a quiet intensity that left people speechless. Colter watched from the porch, arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't like the attention, didn't like the way people stared at her like she was a sideshow attraction. But Iris? She didn't seem to mind. She worked patiently, gently, with a focus that bordered on sacred. One evening, after the last visitor left, Colter found her sitting by the creek, feet in the water, staring at the stars. He sat beside her. You don't have to do this, you know. Help all these people. She looked at him, puzzled. They treated you like trash. Your whole life. And now they want something from you. She picked up a stick and wrote in the dirt. They didn't know better. Now they do. He stared at the words. You're a better person than me. She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. For the first time in 3 years, Colter felt something crack open in his chest, something he thought had died with his wife and son. Hope. If you were Colter, would you trust her gift or fear it? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you're hooked, hit that like button so I know to make more stories like this. It was late November. The sky turned the color of old bruises. The air went still. Too still. Colter was chopping wood when Iris burst out of the cabin, grabbed his arm, and pulled him toward the root cellar. What? She pointed at the horizon, then at the animals. The horses were screaming in the barn. The chickens had gone silent. Even the wind had stopped. There's no storm coming, Iris. Look at the sky. Thunder cracked like the world splitting open. The sky turned green. A sound like a freight train roared over the mountains. Cellar, now! They ran. Iris yanked open the heavy door and shoved him inside. She dove in after him and slammed it shut just as the tornado hit. The world exploded. The roar was deafening. The cellar shook. Dirt rained from the ceiling. Colter pulled Iris against him, covering her head as the storm tried to rip the door off its hinges. It lasted 3 minutes. It felt like 3 hours. When the silence finally came, they climbed out into devastation. The neighbor's barn was gone. Trees were snapped like matchsticks. Fences were torn apart and scattered across the valley. But the Grange ranch stood untouched, not a shingle out of place. The sheriff found them that night, riding through the wreckage with a lantern. How'd you know? Colter looked at Iris. She was staring at the stars, humming softly as if nothing had happened. She heard it, he said quietly. Before it came, the sheriff's face went pale. That ain't possible. Neither is taming a wolf, but she did that too. The sheriff rode away without another word. Winter came hard, snowed them in for weeks. The world shrank to the cabin, the fire, and each other. Colter taught Iris to read better. She taught him to listen, really listen, to the world around him. The creak of ice on the roof, the way the wind changed before a storm, the language of animals. One night by the fire, he finally asked the question that had been burning in him since the day they met. Why don't you talk? Iris stared into the flames for a long time. Then she reached for the slate he'd bought her in town. She wrote slowly. I did once. They hurt me for it. His jaw clenched. Your father? She nodded. He said I heard the devil, that I was cursed. So I stopped talking. Easier that way. What did you hear? She hesitated, then wrote, everything, animals, storms, people's hearts. I knew when they were lying, when they were scared, when they were going to die. Colter's blood ran cold. You can hear death? Sometimes, not always, but enough. Is that why they were afraid of you? Yes. He set down his coffee, knelt in front of her, took the slate from her hands and set it aside. Listen to me, Iris. You're not cursed. You're not broken. You're a gift. You hear me? A gift. Her eyes filled with tears. And you're safe now. No one's ever going to hurt you again. I swear it. She stared at him. Then, in a voice rough and unused, she spoke for the first time in 10 years. Thank you. It was barely a whisper, but it shattered him. Colter pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. Years of pain pouring out. He held her until the fire burned low, until her breathing steadied, until she fell asleep against his chest, and he realized with startling clarity that he loved her. Spring thawed the valley, and with it came trouble. The preacher called a town meeting. Colter heard about it from Hewitt, who rode out to warn him. They're saying she's dangerous, Colter, that she's unnatural. Preacher wants her gone. Gone where? Asylum, or worse. Colter's vision went red. Over my dead body. That's what I'm afraid of. The meeting was held in the church. Colter walked in with Iris at his side. Every head turned. The preacher stood at the pulpit, Bible in hand. This girl is an abomination. She consorts with beasts. She predicts disasters. She speaks without speaking. It's witchcraft, plain and simple. It's a gift, Colter said, voice cutting through the murmurs. A gift from whom? The preacher demanded. God doesn't make monsters. No, Colter said coldly, but men do. You want to know why she doesn't talk? Because her father beat her every time she told the truth. You want to know why she hears things we don't? Because God gave her something you'll never have. Compassion. The room went silent. Colter turned to the crowd. How many of you came to my ranch begging for help? How many animals did she save? How many of you would have lost everything in that tornado if she hadn't warned us? Silence. She's not dangerous. She's the best thing that ever happened to this town. And if you run her out, you're no better than the man who sold her for $1. He took Iris's hand. Come on. We're leaving. But before they reached the door, Old Man Hewitt stood. I stand with Colter. Then the widow. So do I. One by one, the ranchers rose. The families she'd helped. The people whose lives she'd touched. The preacher's face turned purple. But he was outnumbered. The sheriff stepped forward. Meeting's over. Girl stays. Colter nodded once and led Iris out into the sunlight. This story is about more than survival. It's about seeing people for who they really are. If this is hitting you in the feels, subscribe so you don't miss the ending. It's about to get even better. Summer came in gold and green. The ranch thrived. Iris had a garden now. Vegetables, herbs, wildflowers. She spent hours there, humming to the plants, coaxing them to grow. Colter watched her from the porch, mending a saddle, and realized he couldn't imagine life without her. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset, he turned to her. I bought you for $1, he said. She raised an eyebrow. Worst investment I ever made. Her face fell. He grinned. Because now I owe you everything. He pulled a small wooden box from his pocket. Inside was a simple silver ring. His mother's. I'm not good with words, Iris. But I know this. You brought me back to life. You made me remember what it feels like to hope, to love. And I don't want to spend another day without you. He knelt. Will you marry me? She stared at the ring, then at him. Tears streamed down her face. Yes, she whispered. He slipped the ring on her finger, kissed her hand, and pulled her into his arms as the sun set over the mountains. They married in the meadow behind the ranch. The whole town came. Even the preacher, grudgingly. Iris wore a simple white dress the widow had sewn, wildflowers in her hair. She looked like something out of a dream. When the preacher asked if she took Colter as her husband, she spoke clearly. I do. The crowd gasped. It was the first time most of them had heard her voice. Colter grinned. I do too. They kissed as the sun broke through the clouds. And for the first time in years, the valley felt like home. A year later, Iris gave birth to a daughter. She had Colter's dark hair and her mother's quiet, knowing eyes. They named her Grace. The town gathered at the ranch for a celebration. The sheriff brought whiskey. Hewitt brought a hand-carved cradle. The widow brought a quilt. And Iris stood in the doorway, holding her daughter, surrounded by people who had once feared her and now loved her. Colter stood beside his wife, his child, his life, and realized that sometimes the greatest miracles come wrapped in silence. Because Iris hadn't needed saving, she'd been the one saving him all along. Years later, travelers passing through Montana would hear stories about the Grange Ranch, about the woman who could calm storms and speak to animals, about the man who'd bought her for $1 and gained a kingdom. Some said it was legend, others said it was truth. But those who knew, really knew, understood that love doesn't need words. It just needs to be seen. If this story moved you, do me a favor, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And drop a comment telling me, what's the most powerful act of kindness someone's ever shown you. Let's spread some love in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will stay with you long after they end. See you in the next one, friend.